Well, hey, Connexus, Jeff Brody here, and glad that you joined us for this bonus episode of our podcast in the midst of our Love, Dates, and Heartbreak series. And I'm really excited today because I've got a guest with us who's going to share some of what she's learned and her wisdom. And it's Toni Nieuwhof. Hey, Toni. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks so much for the privilege.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. If you don't know who Toni is, you probably do, but Carrie Nieuwhof and Toni Nieuwhof founded Connexus Church, and just an incredible gift to us. And Toni has a real passion around marriage. In fact, Toni, you're currently writing a book on marriage.
That's right.
And you could write a book on anything. So why would that be a topic that you'd pick to write a book on?
Well, I think you might know, Jeff, and some of our listeners might know that I practiced for a number of years in family law. So I had many people sitting in front of me who had gone through deep struggles in their marriages and came to the end and were looking for help in getting through the separation process. And some of the things they told me really gave me a sense of urgency around helping people whose marriages can be helped. You know, in some cases, people are in marriages that are not just unhappy, but they're actually harmful. And so, you know, I would not be advocating for people who are in harmful marriages that they have to stay. You know, that's a complicated question, so it's one to take to a counselor. But I saw people who expressed some regret when they got to the end of the day. So let's say they went through the whole process of separating and working out the parenting schedule and working out the finances, and they drew up their separation agreement and crossed the T's and dotted the I's,
right,
and said at the end of the day, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have worked harder on my marriage.
Right.
So it gave me that push to just get some messages out that might help people who are struggling and they're unhappy and they don't know what to do next.
Right. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think often when you read about marriage, it comes from a counselor's perspective, which is helpful. Number of other perspectives. But your perspective is unique in that you've seen people in some of the most difficult marriage situations.
Sure. And yeah, I guess I'm writing it from the perspective of, in general, the themes of what I saw working with people who were going through separation, but also very personally what happened with Carrie and I in our marriage, and just how close I came to being one of my clients.
Right.
So yeah, that's the motivation.
Right. And one of the gifts that you and Carrie have given to our community is an authenticity about some of the marriage struggles that you've had. And The Struggle is Real, Part 1 is a series if people are looking to hear a little bit more. But Toni, do you just want to recap maybe a little bit of that for people who maybe haven't heard some of the story before?
Sure. It's a long story, Jeff, so I hardly know where to start. But just to give a summary, when Carrie and I were married, we had both been a part of a Christian legal fellowship at Osgoode Hall when we were at law school. And so we were passionately pursuing Christ. Right. And so we chose one scripture as the building block for our marriage ceremony, and it was Ecclesiastes 4:12. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken. Right. And so we went into our marriage with all the best intentions, and we hit the ground running as well. We got married during law school, and then I had our oldest son 10 days after my final exam at law school. So we went from one thing to the other, and Carrie went to seminary, and we came up here to Oro to pastor the churches here, and really, found ourselves in a lot of busyness, but then also found ourselves in a lot of conflict. Right. And what I came to realize over the years was that I was really emotionally unprepared for marriage. And two legal experts in the same marriage brings, I'm sure, its own unique atmosphere of conflict, if you want to put it that way. Well, we can both be passionate passionate advocates.
Right.
So that actually didn't help us.
Right.
But we've had real emotional struggles. We had a lot of conflict. It went on for a long period of time. And we reached the point where I would say, I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And so being at that impasse really tested the verse that we went into our marriage with, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. We felt emotionally disconnected between ourselves. And so we felt that those 2 strands weren't connected, but the one strand holding us together was Christ, thankfully. But it was tough. And I did reach the point where I was completely torn. I knew the vow that I'd made, but also felt the disconnection and wanted to be in a marriage that, felt like a marriage on the inside, didn't just look like a marriage on the outside. Mm-hmm. So it was a tough season. And there was a moment where Carrie and I were in yet another one of our arguments. And I remember clearly we were sitting in the living room and Carrie was doing some ironing, actually. And in the middle of the argument where we were both at risk of just falling into the same old rut we'd been in 1,000 times before, he set the iron down and he looked at me and he said, "That's it. Toni, you deserve someone who cherishes you. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do that from now on." Mm-hmm. And I can say that was one of the things that turned us on a different course.
Wow.
Of course, from there, after you have a long history of conflict, you can build up resentment, bitterness, even contempt. So we had to take baby steps to move away from the position we were in. And if you listen to some of the messages we've given before, you would have already heard that we say your emotions follow your obedience.
Right.
So I found that to be absolutely true, that even when we were in an emotional place where we didn't feel like going to the counselor's office, we didn't feel like doing the homework that the counselor gave us, and didn't feel like being kind to each other when our emotions were kind of struggling against us. But we learned over time that taking those steps of obedience really does bear fruit in the end, and that it is very possible to turn your emotions around completely.
So if there's someone who's listening and they're saying, well, like, what does that mean? Like when I have to make those choices of, I just don't feel it and I have to make a choice. Is it as simple as that, where like mentally you just make the choice, or is there something you would tell yourself? Like how does that look to you?
Yeah. I don't know. Like for me personally, it's probably the power of a pause. Like it's the power of you have the ability to just give yourself a check or give yourself a moment before you respond to something. And, whereas it's very natural to have knee-jerk reactions, and
we live in a society that's reactive. Yeah.
So I'm speaking as someone who's definitely been there, and I'm still there. Hey, let's say, there are times when I don't do this, but to be able to pause and just reflect, even for a second or two, about, what is it that you really want to respond with, or what is it that you've been told you need to do in this kind of situation. And, sometimes making a change, especially a behavioral change, really feels awkward. So doing it for the first while is going to feel awkward.
It's like creating a new pattern.
Yes. And so it's sometimes a matter of reflecting rather than just going with your natural instincts.
Right. Reflecting instead of reacting in some senses.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's something that's been helpful to you, not only in your own relationship, but you've walked with a lot of people. Some people's marriages have survived, some have thrived, some haven't survived. What are some of the kind of common denominators or flags that people should be looking for in their relationship, or themes that you see there that might be helpful to people?
Do you mean the red flags for
Are there
trouble?
common red flags for trouble would be one, I guess we could say,
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a marriage researcher, very prominent and well-known researcher, John Gottman. He wrote a book called The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work.
Okay.
It's an excellent resource. He talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Okay.
He'll call them. So these are warning signs that
apocalyptic marriage advice.
Yes. So these are signs that your marriage could be headed for trouble if you are displaying these things. And it would have been so helpful for Carrie and I to have been able to talk about these things and recognize them earlier on in our marriage. So that's why I'm raising them now. He talks about criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
they all ring true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when I think back to all the mess that Carrie and I went through, we definitely would have noted all of those 4 horsemen, and if I could say anything, it would be to really pay attention to the dynamics between you and how you're responding to each other, because let's say criticism, for example, you may have something that is very true to say about your spouse, but it could also be hurtful, and it could be said in a spirit of criticism as opposed to a spirit of love or helpfulness.
Right.
And it's a very easy, I think every couple experiences this. There's some research out there that shows that if you can rein in that negativity and include more positivity in your communications with each other. So, let's say they talk about a 5-to-1 ratio of 5 of positive feedback, statements of admiration or affection or noticing something good,
right.
something that is praiseworthy, and making that ratio 5-to-1. 5 positives to 1 negative.
Right.
And also, when you talk about red flags, I think I would also look at, in the midst of a busy schedule, is there no time left for the marriage? Like just for time together, for enjoying each other, time just to be married people and not to be parents or not to be employees or not to be the one who runs the business, but just to be a couple. So lack of time, a lack of priority on the marriage. And I guess the other red flag I would really look at is an impasse that is really provoking a lot of conflict or negative feelings. I think it's common in a marriage to have issues that you can't reconcile, that you can't get to a point where you're actually seeing eye to eye.
Right.
And that's okay, because you can work on that issue and come up with some kind of solution. Often people get into the trap of thinking that if there's a problem, there's your position and there's my position, and it's binary, and there's a struggle over who's going to win.
Sure. I'm like that. I'm super competitive. So it's win, lose, or nothing. So I get that.
So, but I think that, you've been around the block enough times, Jeff, to know that there's actually not just 2 solutions. There's probably 10 solutions. There could even be 100 solutions. And so it's a matter of being creative and just working on it and getting the input and taking the steps until you can actually find something that works. And so, having an impasse and just leaving it and letting it fester is a definite red flag.
Now, can you repeat those 4 horsemen again? Because I'm sure somebody's in their car. They're trying to write them down madly. Can you repeat them one more time?
Okay, the 4 horsemen: criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling. And by stonewalling, it means like shutting down.
Right.
And contempt.
Got it. And one of the takeaways for me already is it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, right? Mm-hmm. There's an element of, when you talk about speaking critically or speaking positively.
Yes.
Sometimes we talk more about what we're arguing about than how we argue.
Yes.
Just kind of an interesting thought.
Great point.
Yeah. Well, I know, Toni, we've talked a little bit about some of this. And one of the things that you've talked about is that actually there are prior experiences to our marriage that we can bring into the marriage. I've heard Andy Stanley say there's no marriage problems, just personal problems that we bring with us. I would love for you to just speak to that. How do our prior experiences kind of play out in our current relationship?
Wow, that is, I think we could do a whole episode or a whole month of episodes on that one topic.
I'm sure.
I think people are generally aware that, you could have a traumatic experience in your past, and it may, if you're not aware of it, show up in the ways you respond to things in the current day.
Right.
So, there's, if you've really been, if you've been subjected to violence as a child, then you may be very leery about getting close to people as an adult. And, there's all kinds of different ways that our baggage can impact our current circumstances.
Right.
And I think, with our marriages being our close relationships, our closest, among our closest intimate relationships, it's inevitable that any of those hurts or traumatic experiences or wounds from the past will show up in your current relationship.
Right.
And often it will show up in areas like how you deal with your differences, how you handle emotional pain. Do you try to avoid it? Do you try to run away from it at all costs? So wounds and baggage from the past are definitely things that show up in a marriage. In addition to that, I think I would talk about expectations. So, when we go through our experiences of our homes, our childhood homes, and then the schools we went to, the media we've been exposed to, any community groups we've been a part of, we sort of assess our life and what we want out of it as adults.
Right, based on that experience.
Yes, we develop expectations. And sometimes the expectations between a man and woman can be completely opposite. And they won't necessarily realize it, but there are ways that expectations can interfere with continuing a long-term relationship. Like, if I can just tell you a story,
Sure.
There's, I'm going to call them Mitch and Miranda.
Okay.
Got married in their mid-20s and everything looked perfect. And, they had a wonderful wedding and they started out, and they would have been a couple that from the outside seemed like they were completely in tune with each other and had no worries about their future as a couple. And as it turned out, within a couple of years, they were divorced. And when I asked Miranda what happened to end up with this outcome, she said that Mitch had grown up in a family. He was raised by a single mother, and I'm not saying that critically. I'm just saying he didn't have a parent role model, an adult couple role model in his life. So he didn't really see what a typical close adult relationship looks like when he was growing up. So he adopted his expectations from shows on TV, like Leave It to Beaver.
Oh, wow.
And so in his mind, the home would be peaceful and orderly. If they had any disagreements, they'd be mild-mannered and, may even end up with a laugh. And when he hit the frustrations of a real close relationship, he just came to the conclusion that, I made the wrong choice, I married the wrong person, and he was gone. So sometimes unrealistic expectations can form in us without us even realizing it.
One of the places that probably gets identified is in counseling for some people, I would think. What would you say, Toni, to, I mean, I run into people all the time who are, well, we want to go to counseling one day, but I'm nervous, I'm afraid. What are your thoughts on that? And what would you say to somebody in that situation?
I cannot speak more strongly about just, ditching those fears and inhibitions and any idea that there's a stigma attached to counseling, because it has proven to be so valuable in helping me personally grow, in helping us with our marriage. And hey, even today, I will still book counseling appointments just because there's a relationship issue or an emotional issue that I feel I'm dealing with. And I've found that having the insight and experience of a counselor has just taken me farther up the field faster. So I would absolutely say find a trained and experienced counselor and go and get the benefit.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about my humanity or humanity in general that we can't see something in ourselves, but someone else can see it so easily. I don't know. There's a gift about that.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, Toni, conflict is something that you talked about that you and Carrie have worked through. Conflict is something you worked through in your practice, obviously. When it comes to conflict, you've talked about the fact that with me that you can actually grow closer together in a conflict. And to me, that seems counterintuitive. Like, how does conflict grow you closer together? So I would love to hear your thoughts on what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. I think in the end, the way we deal with conflict, harkening back to what you said before, the way we talk to each other in conflict makes a huge difference. So I think when we get into differences of opinion, we have the opportunity to learn more about the other person. And often, sometimes issues are feel like hot button issues, particularly if you're a parent. When you deal with differences of opinion over parenting, they tend to strike quite close to the heart. Anything having to do with your kids does.
Right.
And so, it's sometimes hard to actually sit back and be curious about the perspective of the other person. But if you can do that, you are going to learn more and you have the potential to grow closer together.
Right.
Now, that's a perspective that I can say after years and years of doing it wrong, Jeff. So, for anyone who's out there and finding that, conflict is like, I'm just sick of it and I want to bury my head and, I want to run in the other direction. I don't blame you for feeling that way because I felt that way before too. But yeah, in conflict, I think we all end up having this feeling that that I'm the victim, that my partner is saying things or pushing for a position or doing things that are really putting me at risk, or they feel like they're putting me at risk, or it feels like maybe an attack against me or an affront. And, we can end up feeling like I'm being hard done by and I'm the victim here. And I think the Enneagram has really been helpful.
Oh, right.
With that kind of perspective, because it's true that we have different personalities, have different approaches to conflict. And so, where we deal with conflict in different ways, we can end up feeling like we're a victim of the other person merely because they're wired differently, they manage conflict differently, and they have different needs.
Right. Right. And if on the Enneagram, we've just finished a great discussion about it in the Know Yourself series.
Yes.
And if you're hearing this and you want to check that out, you can check that out on our website as well. I would love to hear, I think when you talk about conflict, so often people think about the kind of angry, frustrated, hot kind of conflict versus in some relationships, I think there are people who just avoid, slowly drift apart. Eventually, we're like roommates living in the same house. Yeah. And do you have any tips there? Like, what does a family, what does a couple do when they're moving in that direction?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, because you're right, Jeff. Sometimes couples are struggling because they have that angry, combative fighting going on. But then I've seen couples who are very reasonable with each other, and tend to not raise their voices.
Or one person just shuts down.
Yes.
And next thing you know, I'm sleeping in one bed, they're sleeping in the other bed, and nobody really, there wasn't a big fight. It just kind of went that way.
It was a drifting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think that happens sometimes just insidiously over time when, I've even seen it happen where scheduling was an issue. So let's
talk about
say, we've got a young couple or a couple that has young kids, maybe they're infants or toddlers, and they are super motivated parents. So they have all the best intentions. They want to look after their kids as best they can, and they want to try to avoid having a third party involved in looking after their kids. So, they're trying to avoid babysitting, and maybe they arrange their schedules so that one person is home with the kids while the other person is working, and then vice versa. And so it's typically couples who have the opportunity to work evenings or night shifts, who have that kind of flexibility in their schedule. And so, they've made this arrangement, but over time, it leads to them being very disconnected. And it's a time issue. It's because they haven't been able to spend time together as a couple, and let's face it, raising kids that way is wearing. Like it's not easy to do. So people end up being exhausted.
You're just tagging off.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So. And that goes back to one of the red flags that I mentioned earlier, which is just not prioritizing the marriage.
Right.
So I would say advice for young couples: when you are setting up your schedule, do just make sure that schedule fits with time for you as a couple, time to date each other. Leave some margin, don't schedule to the very edges of your time and think that that's a long-term strategy. It may work for a season, but it's not going to work in the long haul.
Yeah. I mean, even from a childcare perspective, for some people, I know in our situation when we moved here, like we didn't have any family here. So it does take that much extra effort to find someone you trust and pay them to come and babysit. So there's a financial investment, there's a time investment.
Yes. That
I would admit at times just felt like, oh, it's such a pain. Like it would be just easier if you watched them and I went out and got done what I need to get done. It's nothing intentional in a sense, but it just kind of happens.
And I agree with you. It is a trust issue. And hey, when we're talking about our kids, it's a really, really valid, vital question. Do you trust the people who are looking after your kids? But I'd love to ask you that question, Jeff. So how did you find people you trusted?
It took us some time. So for a while, what we did was when we wanted to go away for a weekend, one of our parents would have to drive kind of 5-6 hours because that was all we knew and all we trusted.
Right.
And then we started to kind of just find might be kids at Connexus who we knew who could babysit.
Sure.
Who did people recommend?
Yes.
And got to know those people a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think I felt like, oh, wow, we're going to have to do this for a long time. But we didn't really, because it wasn't that long. Our kids grow up quicker than we think.
Oh,
and I'll never forget
true.
The first night we said, okay, boys, you're going to watch Star Wars on the couch. We're going to go out to a restaurant around the corner for 2 hours because they were old enough to do that, and you keep the phone right next to you. And
I think we were with you guys in one of those early
times.
It
could have been. We were out for dinner together, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an element of, okay, that came faster than we thought. And so I think we realize in hindsight, if we just pushed through that time and made it a priority, it wasn't as long as we kind of thought.
Yeah.
I would love for you, Toni, to talk about, different stages that you navigate. That was a stage we were in, but the different stages that couples navigate. I know you and Carrie pretty well, so I get the opportunity to kind of watch recently the transition to becoming empty nesters and what that looks like in that stage. But there's a stage, there'll be people with young kids, people with kids in high school. Any tips on sort of how to navigate the different stages of relationships?
Oh, yeah. So in the early stages, I think even before you have kids, you have the opportunity to start building community if you don't have it already. So really build into good, solid relationships outside of your marriage. Like, go on double dates with people, develop some good, great, solid friendships, build into the family members you're close to. And, when you head into the next stage with babies, toddlers, you're going to need that community. You need to have someone you can call on so that maybe the two of you can finally get out for an evening together, or you can get away for that weekend. Or even just, this is a really trying day. I have a sick child on my hands. I got to go to the hospital. I need someone to look after my other kid. So, there's ways that you just need to be plugged into good relationships with other people in those early stages.
It's interesting you say that, because I don't know if this is true, but there's probably an element of when you're struggling relationally, do people isolate? Like, would they isolate themselves versus reaching out for community? I hadn't thought about that before, but I'm just curious what you think. Yeah,
Jeff, that is actually one of the common themes I would see in the stories of people who would end up in my office as a lawyer. It would be that one of them or both of them became isolated. And it's such a hard place to be, and it's frankly such a dangerous place to be. Like, if there's any place where I think, we talk about the forces opposed to God, as being Satan or whatever you call it, the forces of evil. I really do believe that the enemy works in isolation. Nothing good happens in isolation.
Right.
And unfortunately, people do tend to go there, and it's associated with mental health conditions like depression, and I've been there before myself, where I've been so depressed that it's a massive effort, and I might not even be able to pick up the phone to make a call. And, and that's where having a community in place is vital. I had to have somebody pick up the phone and call my doctor for me when I was in that spot. So I just can't stress how important those close relationships are.
And you just want to I know you gave a couple examples, but places that you found that community over time, where you found those friends?
Definitely in our church. We've had a small group network in place for years, and I love being a part of a small group. I just find it to be so grounding, and such a place where you can be real with each other, and do life together. And whether it's celebrating the great times or whether it's pulling each other through the tough times, I just can't see living any other way. And then we did build into relationships with other people we met at sports teams, for example. Our kids' hockey teams. We had great relationships with parents there, and work relationships, and then just close friendships. You meet people along the way that you have great chemistry with, and those relationships are valuable, and even more valuable over time.
Now, community, it sounds like getting friendships is a proactive way of, kind of putting things into place in your relationship. Other things that you and Carrie have done, I know you've done some things to be proactive. We've talked a lot about what are you doing when you're reacting, what are proactive things people could be doing in order to improve their marriage?
I've heard people talk about going to counseling proactively.
Okay, what does that mean?
Sarah and Justin Piercy talk about this, and they wrote about it in their blog.
Okay.
But they talk about just going to counseling, not because they have a particular problem that they have to solve, but because they want a great marriage. And so learning more about themselves and, about the hiccups they experience along the way is just so helpful. In the research shows that for a couple who feels they're sort of disconnected, deciding to take on some novel and exciting activities together can be really helpful. And so when we talk about novel and exciting, it might be those adrenaline rush things that come to mind, like bungee jumping, but that's not what they mean.
Okay.
It doesn't mean bungee jumping.
Right. Okay.
It could be like oyster shucking or square dancing, or I'm pulling out ridiculous examples, but that people may really like. But it could be anything that is new and really appealing for both of you that you could say is either novel or exciting. And when you each, say for example, draw up a list and see where you can agree on some of those activities, the research showed that where couples did this for 90 minutes a week for 4 weeks in a row, they ended up feeling more satisfied with their relationship and closer to each other at the end of that period.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I can attest firsthand that Toni takes her own advice, because I actually remember hanging out with Carrie one time, and he said to me, Sam was moving out. You guys are going to be empty nesters. And he said to me, he said, it's just Toni and I now. So I'm going to take on one thing that she likes to do, and she's going to try something that I like to do. And, we're going to just experience something different. And I thought I was like, wow, that's a pretty intentional, proactive thing to do. And I know you guys do lots of stuff together now. It's snowshoeing and walks and, all the things that you enjoy to do together.
Yeah. And I can't say that it's always like something novel every week. That sounds like a pretty high standard when I talk about it, but it might be as simple as, you're not going to go back to that trail. You're going to try a new trail. You're going to go to this new restaurant, or maybe, you've set a date and you're going to go caving. Maybe pretend that you're a tourist in your own area. Right.
Fun and affordable at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they don't have to be really costly, and they also don't have to be like adrenaline rush experiences.
Right.
And I think the other proactive thing that I really would want to stress for our audience is praying together.
All right. Talk about that, Toni.
And praying together is, I think, just something that has the potential to bond you and to help just bring light and bring clarity into the middle of your relationship. I think it can help through the tough times and can help set your marriage on a different trajectory. It certainly did for us. But I think for some people, there can be expectations around praying together, and I'd just like to encourage people not to have defined expectations.
So what do you mean? Yeah, give me an example.
Yeah, for example, to not expect necessarily that if you're going to pray together as a couple, that your wife, who isn't used to praying out loud, is actually going to say anything out loud. Like, I don't want couples to experience a real pressure from each other, as if they're being, they're kind of being hit over the head to say something out loud. I think it needs to be more invitational than that.
Okay, right.
And I think Jesus modeled this when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, that when he asked the few disciples who were close to him to go and pray with him while he was in that anguished prayer, he went off, he spoke the words himself. He wasn't demanding that they speak any words.
Right.
They were with him. And so I think there needs to be a freedom in that praying together.
So if somebody's kind of intimidated by this, let's say somebody, maybe both people, one person. So would you say it could be like holding hands and praying in silence, or one person prays out?
Absolutely. It could be. It could look like that, Jeff. Or it might be that one of you has found a prayer or written down a prayer, and you read it read it together with both of you there. That would be a great first step. And it can be just as simple a prayer as, Jesus, please be here with us and show us that you're real. Or give us your wisdom about X. It can be such a simple prayer. I think people build up expectations around what prayer has to look like. And I just like to encourage people to have a more free approach, a more invitational approach to praying together.
Oh, that's great. That's really, really helpful. Now, Toni, we're going to have some people who are listening who aren't married.
Yes.
But maybe they're looking at getting married, or there's someone who they're potentially going to be married to. What are the things that they should be asking their potential spouse, or what should they be keeping an eye out for as they look towards marriage?
That's a great question. I think the number one thing I would want to say to people is don't fool yourself into thinking that you can change the other person.
Okay, wow. So explain that.
Well, we've seen many cases where a couple is, they're happy in their relationship together. And when you get together, it's common to be able to see all the positives and to turn a blind eye to the things that, you really are not a big fan of, or not even see them. And to not have conversations about things like values, things like, what do you see your life looking like in 10 years? What are your wishes and desires for being a parent? Would you ever adopt a child? What happens if we can't have children? Those kinds of deeper questions. Sometimes I think they go by the wayside in the midst of wedding planning and traveling and, those things that are really like bright, shiny objects in the near.
Well, and they might not be fun. They might not be fun conversations, so you avoid them,
Yeah, they're harder conversations, and they may bring up some differences of opinion, and that, may end up feeling a bit difficult. But I think if that's the case, then it's absolutely worthwhile to go to a pre-marriage session, sign up for a workshop, go to a counselor, get some help, go to a pastor who does pre-marriage counseling. There's various ways that you can try to work through those issues. But it's so important to bring out into the open those differences in expectations. I have a story from a pastor who had an example. So he had a couple who came to him for pre-marriage advice. And so he had a habit of asking a couple of questions, and they would write down on a piece of paper what their expectation was, and then they'd reveal it and just see how close they were in their expectations. So he asked a couple about how frequently they were expecting they would have sex after they got married. And so they both wrote down their answers, and he flipped over the man's answer, and it said 13 times a week, and flipped over the woman's answer, and it said question mark. And so he said, 13 is a very specific number. How did you arrive at that? And he said, oh, it's easy. Twice a day on every day except Sunday. And she looked like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, really, really. Wow. It's funny how the expectations you walk in with are just so different.
They can be dramatically different. So you really want to have those conversations before you get married.
That's great. Toni, this has been so rich. There's so much we could talk about. But I don't know if you know when the book's coming out yet. Are you allowed to tell us that yet?
Oh, yeah. The plan is January 2021. Okay. I don't have an exact date, but that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah. Well, we'll be letting Connexus people know, because I know there'll be people who want to get their hands on that at that time. And then I know you've got a podcast. People, you might not know this, but you need to jump on it. Toni and Rob Meter, who's a physician in our church, have a brand new podcast. Why don't you tell us what it's about, Toni?
Sure. It's called the Smart Family Podcast, and we've designed it basically to help people love being home.
Oh, wow.
So we want to help strengthen marriages. We want to help parents with the issues that they struggle with. And if any of our listeners have any ideas on topics, we're all ears. So please just send us a comment at our website. Our website is smartfamilypodcast.com, or connect with us on Instagram. It's also Smart Family Podcast.
Okay, great.
So I guess in line with the topic we're talking about today, we have an episode with Dr. Craig Brannon.
Oh, wow.
On shame and how it impacts marriages.
Oh, wow.
So that's potentially a good resource for people.
And you're about 4 episodes in, so get in at the ground floor and jump in on that podcast, because I know there's already a lot of gold there and you'll want to pick up on that. But Toni, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. I know it's going to be helpful to so many people.
Oh, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this podcast and for the invitation. I'm really honored.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks, Toni.
Thank you.